Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Before I welcome my guests here in the studio, I'm receiving some breaking news from Iraq. Kurdish forces in the north of the country have taken control of Iraq's largest dam after its capture by the Islamic State militants. That's according to Kurdish officials, and we'll be bringing you more on that throughout the program. Now allow me to welcome here in the studio Ambassador Mohammed Salem, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for coming in tonight.
Good to be here.
And Dr. Ibrahim Al-Ghazawi, he is a professor of international law. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Ambassador Mohammed, I'll start off with you, if I may. How do you see the situation as it currently stands in Iraq?
I see it as very serious, not only for Iraq, but for the region. I think you have a major game changer, a major threat to the regional security order. And it's a threat at several levels. It's a threat because it's a major challenge to the idea of Arab nationalism, that a force representing an extremist form of Islam is presenting itself, abolishing borders between two states, Iraq and Syria, practicing major atrocities, major violations of human rights, and yet the reaction of the region has been very weak. In fact, it has been almost absent.
Right.
So the fact that you have a major challenge, an existentialist challenge, and the fact that the region is at a moment when its weakness has made it unable to respond is very serious.
So you think it's the regional weakness that has made it unable to react appropriately, or do you think that they don't regard the IS as a threat to themselves?
Well, I think it's there are many factors. For you have to say that Iraq is also at a very bad stage in its political development.
Right.
That it's divided. The leadership of the country was lacking. It's almost difficult to put Iraq together again. But also, if you look at the region, definitely there is a lack of capacity in terms of perceiving the threat,
right,
analyzing it, looking at options for reaction, and then formulating a reaction. Even formulating a reaction to the role of external factors. Today, when you were talking just now about the Mosul Dam, the U.S. forces played an important role in helping the Kurds recapture the dam. Now, where is the reaction of the Arab world? The military assistance that is coming in directly to the Kurdish entity, which means that the Kurdish entity now has direct international de facto recognition that the army of Kurdistan is going to be stronger and stronger, and you will come to a moment when the Kurds will declare an independent state, and who can oppose them?
Right.
So there are very serious dynamics as a result of what's happening now. And I am one of the people who is really disappointed and surprised at the lack of response from the Arab system, whether the Arab League. The Arab League has a meeting coming up on the 5th of September, Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs. I was looking at the agenda today. There's nothing on Iraq.
Right.
How could you be meeting at this critical moment and so late in the day and yet not addressing such a major threat? So there is a big problem, I think.
And you mentioned something that's very important, that the Kurds could declare an independent state, and then that would obviously mean Iraq again being divided, which is in essence what the Arab nation doesn't want.
Well, it's the nemesis of the Arab national idea that the Arab world may combine a number of different identities, but together they share so much that the idea of a regional organization, the idea of a regional common market, a regional destiny makes sense, and the whole world is moving in that direction. But here we are traveling in the opposite direction.
Right.
We're going towards more division. We're going towards ethnic divisions along tribal and religious dividing lines, and plus with a huge amount of atrocities. So it will leave a lot of bitterness.
Right. I'll come to you, Dr. Ibrahim. Now, obviously, again, I'd like to first taken just your overall impression of what's happening in Iraq now?
Well, I totally agree with Mr. Ambassador Mohammed Anis, and probably if I would have to add something to that, I would see some positive. The question is that they mostly occupy the northern region of Iraq today, and unless United States intervened, a few days ago with the aerial attacks or bombardment to their sites, they would have been even expanding in terms of their influence on the region.
We'll get into the details of that and who they are and what do they want and what are their plans for the region. But before that, let's take a look again at Haider al-Abadi's appointment. Because a lot of people are saying, really, there is no difference between Haider al-Abadi and Nouri al-Maliki. They're both Shiites. They both come from the ruling state of Noor coalition. So what's the difference between these two men?
No, there must be a difference. Actually, Nouri al-Maliki himself is not a 100% Shia. I mean, yes, probably his policies during his 2 terms were more or less going to the interest of some segments, and not all of them of the Iraqi community. But it's still, you cannot say that it's totally divided over ethnic borders between different Iraqi components or the community components. While the positive thing about Haider al-Abadi, he's just a new face, and Maliki has been burned down in the last few years. A lot of his policies and a lot of his actions in the last couple of years have been controversial from the Sunni side and from the Kurdish side as well.
Right.
And if we knew that the Kurds have withdrawn their ministers from the government, and a lot of problems happened in the last couple of years between him as a person, as a prime minister, and other key figures in the other segments in the Iraqi community. So Maliki being away from the political scene is a real achievement, and Haider al-Abadi is also a bright name in the Iraqi political stage. He has good history as a politician, moderate one, and I think Iraqis, even, and this is always what I used to say, that where is the community, where is the society of what is going on the political scene? Today, I believe that Iraqis, normal people, realize more than ever that they have to come together, whether they are Shiite, whether they are Sunni, whether they are, whatever their religious or ideological affiliation are, they have to come together today. This is the biggest challenge in their history. If they don't do this today, I think that this could be the last chance for them. Okay,
Ambassador Mohammed, do you see any difference between the two men as Dr. Ibrahim just mentioned?
No, there is a difference. I think, yes, your question there was a good one, because Abadi was the spokesperson for the party of the Prime Minister, so obviously he belongs to that kind of political trend. But I think Maliki at the end came to symbolize a certain rigidity, an inability to make compromises, a formula of government that was more in line with sectarianism, perhaps an element of I would say rather a kind of a naive kind of Iranian influence. So I think anything that can move away from that was important, and there was a critical factor because the United States conditioned its military intervention on a change in Baghdad. Right. So this at least opened the doors for obviously a military intervention that had become very necessary at the end. Whether it's too late in the day to save Iraq as a country as we know it, the Iraq which was a result of the San Remo conference in 1920, whether that formula is salvageable or it's too late, we'll have to wait and see, because the reality is that the Kurdish entity in Iraq and now also in Syria is starting to have so many trappings of an independent state that it's very difficult to see them rolling back. Right. When you start seeing an entity that has its own flag, it has its own international representation, It is starting to have direct international relations with outside parties. It seems that that has traveled too far along the way to pull it back. At the same time, the relations, the Sunni-Shia relations inside Iraq have gone through so many difficult times over the last 10, 11 years that it's very difficult to see them working together. It will be a great act of statesmanship if the present government manages to pull this together, comes together with a federal state formula. Whether it will survive or not, there are just too many things, too many challenges against it.
Right. But does an independent Kurdish state serve the theory that some analysts have put forward that there is a plan to divide the Middle East?
I am not one of those people who believe in conspiracy theories.
Right.
I believe that you have a set of dynamics in the region, and there are very objective reasons for those happening. And when we study history, we find out why these things are happening. So it's not as if we're waiting for an outside conspiracy. It's that you have very real reasons for what's happening now. I would argue that it probably is not in the interests of many states in the world, whether they are big powers or regional powers. It's not in their interest to see this happening. For example, I don't think it's really in the interest of Turkey to see an independent Kurdish state, because that will visit them very soon. So I don't think the Turks would be very happy to see this. I don't think that a country like Saudi Arabia, even a country like Iran, would necessarily feel very comfortable with a Turkish entity, with a Kurdish entity. So you have regional actors who may don't have the power to prevent something happening, but this will be detrimental to their own interests. The question is, does the regional security system have instruments and the political will to start driving events in the region and to start resisting certain trends? Can the Arab world, for example, start making it more attractive for the different factions in Iraq to stay together by offering them the opportunity of a bigger market, opportunities for development, recognition, allowing space for local entities like the Kurds or other groups to have a room for self-expression, to have a fair share of resources. All of these formulas will be needed. But also, when you have a crisis like this, the Arab world has not shown its ability even to provide humanitarian assistance. So I see that whatever Arab reaction was there happened actually in coordination with international forces. For example, the Jordanians supplied military equipment to the Kurds through the Americans. So I mean, where is the regional system here in this? And the fact that the system is not working well means that all of the other crises we shall see in the future will require international intervention from a very early stage, because nobody will feel that they can rely on a regional reaction. And we've seen this already in the case of Libya, and we've seen it also in the case of Syria, that the Arab League elected at a very early stage to turn everything over to the international mechanism, to the Security Council, and wash their hands away. So we've seen Resolution 1970 from the Security Council on Libya, and then the subsequent intervention, and we've seen the same more or less in Syria. Now this obviously requires some rethinking.
Well, looking back at Haider al-Abadi's history, I mean, now we've got the Kurdish Peshmerga, they're very close. But Haider al-Abadi's history, Dr. Ibrahim, with the Kurds hasn't been very good. I mean, last year he warned that a dispute over Iraqi Kurdistan's oil exports could lead to the disintegration of the country, and was criticized by Kurdish politicians during the negotiations over the 2013 budget. So it's not a very sound relationship there. But do you think that he can unify the country now? And how important is inclusiveness at this point?
What I think will be instructive here, the course of actions by IS groups in Iraq, and I think this is going to help to a large extent, going to help Hyder Abadi from one side, and also the Kurdish people, leaders, to be more patriotic, more national in terms of their thinking, instead of only thinking about their narrow interests, narrow ethnic interest or whatever. They have what they have witnessed in the last couple of weeks, the massacres that have been committed by the IS and groups, and I'm quite sure that they realize today that what they need is not one support their sectarian ambitions to become independent Kurdistan inside Iraq, and I think they have to come back to the more national senses of things, recognizing that the threat that is going to face them, they will not be able to face it alone. And they have to recognize also that it's not a matter of oil. The power is not only oil, the power is not only money. A lot of things are constituting the equation of power, not only money, not only oil. Today they should realize that more than ever. And I think the attitude of Hyder Abadi in that sense it should be accommodated by the Kurdish leaders. As Mr. Ambassador just said a couple of minutes ago about the movement of the region itself, and it's a really sad fact that it looks like the Arabs are usually moving backward instead of moving forward, while the other parts of the world are joining hands together to create larger economic blocks and ideological blocks. We are going in the way of in dismantling the existing entities, and that's gross mistake historically, and gross mistake in the future. So how long it's going to take until they realize, different factions in Iraq, until they realize that they have to come back to their national senses of being one Iraq? This is a critical question today. That's why I value positively the positive signs that I talked about at the beginning. And I see, and I not only see it, but also I hope internally, inside myself as an Arab person, in the same topic of nationalism, Arab nationalism, that we lived through for years and years, and now we are seeing it fading away, and not for the interest of any group. If you think about that, if they think about that, there is no one benefiting from what is going on, and but only Israel, and only the enemies of the Arabs. So it's so clear for us, so clear for everyone. Why is it not clear for them? Was the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, of this, growing conflict between different factions in Iraq were not there enough for them to recognize it's enough today. They have to come back to their senses, and they have to come back to one Iraq, and that's the only way they will make their future more positive, brighter for the coming generations. In the last couple of days, tens of hundreds of Zaydis were massacred by IS, and before that, thousands and thousands were also slaughtered like animals. And that's not a threat pointed only against one faction or another. It's against Iraq. They have to recognize that. It doesn't recognize religion or fiction or ethnic or whatever, and they have to recognize this. One of the things that probably should be valued positively is this kind of agreement internationally from United States, from United Kingdom, and from France, and from other major power in the international scene, and also from United Nations side, to support Hyder al-Abadi, and to support the new positive expectations of the government, the undergoing formulation of the government that should take place within a couple of weeks. So I hope that with this international pressure, with this gloomy picture becoming more recognizable by the parties on the ground there, they have to come together and to come back to their senses, to one Iraq. And unless they do that, they will face a very dark future.
Well, gentlemen, if you'll allow me to take a look at the following report, our second report for the evening, and it takes a look at the European Union, which sought to forge a unified response to the rapid advance of militants in Iraq and the resulting refugee crisis. Let's take a look.
Foreign ministers of the European Union on Friday unanimously endorsed the efforts of individual member states to provide military support to the beleaguered Kurds in northern Iraq and welcomed attempts by United States forces to head off an escalation of the humanitarian crisis there. The European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Catherine Ashton had been seeking to forge a common response to the latest escalation of the crisis in Iraq, in which the semi-autonomous Kurdish North has been threatened by militants of the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or the ISIS, after the talks. German Foreign Minister said he was flying to Iraq to meet Kurdish leaders and the government in Baghdad to discuss what support is most needed. A statement on the minister's conclusions on Iraq said they would continue to work on providing humanitarian aid and welcomed the decision by individual member states to respond positively to the call by the Kurdish regional authorities to provide urgently needed military materials. The EU welcomes the US efforts to support the Iraqi national and local authorities in their fight against the ISIL and recognizes international and European responsibility to cooperate with Iraq in their common fight against terrorism. In addition to the French, the Czechs and Italians were also said to be preparing military aid for Iraq, and British Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond has said Britain would look favorably on Iraqi requests for arms to combat the ISIS. Meanwhile, the UN has declared its highest level of emergency in Iraq as a humanitarian crisis follows the advance by Islamic State militants in the north. Kurdish officials said the situation in Duke City with 150,000 refugees was now critical. The UN estimates that 1.2 million Iraqis have been internally displaced. The UN had estimated that tens of thousands of people, most from the Christian and Yazidi religious minorities, were besieged on the mountain after being forced to flee their homes. The three other countries that have the same emergency status are Syria, South Sudan and the Central African Republic.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Mohammed, we were just seeing some very painful scenes of displaced Iraqis and Iraqis moving around, whether they be minorities or people who have been having been forced out of their homes. What do you think, thoughts about the international community's response? Obviously, you've expressed your opinion about Arab response, but what about the international community's response to all this?
The scenes we have seen are nothing in comparison to the scenes we are looking at every day in social media. We see severed heads, and we see mass executions, and we see women taken into slavery. So we're seeing something that's much more atrocious than those very nice pictures, relatively nice pictures, because those are people who are displaced. And by the way, the Arab world today has probably the largest displaced population in the world. Between Sudan, Darfur, Syria and Iraq, what we're looking at is a huge displacement of people. So the scene is terrible, and the shortcoming is not only in terms of the regional order, the shortcoming is every sector of society. When we were talking just now in the break, and we were saying that I don't think personally that Al-Azhar has played its role. I don't think that civil society has played a role. When we talk about the Red Crescent societies in the region, when we talk about the media in the region, I don't think any of these have played their role. So we have a major issue that requires us to look in the mirror. The international community has been going through different phases in its reaction to this. Obviously, the public opinion in the world was really shocked by the images
Right.
that we saw, in the early phases when the kind of, because this is a strategy of terror that ISIS uses as part of its military strategy. So obviously the world, you could see the shock by the commentary in the different newspapers and the media around the world generally. But apart from that, there was a set of conditionalities. One was that the United States demanded a change in Iraq, and obviously those were the first set of messages that went out to Maliki, and which Maliki did not heed. And the U.S. was very reticent in terms of a military, direct military intervention. Now, the West is conditioned now by a certain attitude towards military intervention. Right. In my reading is that particularly after the vote in the British Parliament on the intervention in Syria in September last year, when the Parliament rejected the proposal by the government that has the majority in Parliament, to assist the United States in its what was at that time something that was under consideration. Right. It was just considering an intervention, and I think that was really a changing point. That it was obvious that public opinions in the West don't want to see direct military intervention, what's being called boots on the ground.
Right.
Now, at the same time, the atrocities made this a very popular decision. Right. The public opinion in the United States has been supportive of President Obama's decision to direct these strikes against ISIS in Iraq, although they are critical of his general foreign policy stance. But on that specific decision, there was support. So as that movement happened, you could obviously see that there was a degree of coordination, because the EU came with a position. France and the UK took a position saying that they would provide military assistance to the Kurds, that they would provide humanitarian assistance to the Yazidis, and that they would together, there was a consensus that this ISIS project cannot be allowed to succeed. These are very important points.
Right.
Very, very important, because there is a strategic vision across the board. What is of concern to me in all of this is that a lot of the strategy depends on supporting the Kurdish entity, the Kurdish, what's called the regional entity. So this has its own dynamics, because it means that you're moving towards this track of empowering the Kurds more and more to become an independent state. So that's the kind of caveat I have vis-a-vis the Western strategy on what's happening in Iraq.
Well, really, the key question is, what will it take to stop the IS from advancing in Iraq, advancing in Syria, and in the region?
Well, it has to be a multi-pronged strategy. Yeah. All of these kind of things, you come at a very late point in the game and say what it's going to take. It would have been much easier if we started saying this a year from now, a year earlier. If we had started saying, and many of us have written about this, about the situation in Syria, and the dangers of supporting extremist groups in Syria. That this will have, I wrote about this many times, that if you start supporting these groups, you will have a regional spillover, because the ethnic divides go across the borders. And once you start with one part of the region, the dynamo effect will have it spill across borders and show somewhere else. But that doesn't mean that it's too late. It means that you have to have a stand. First, you need, obviously, to have a political stand. You have to say that the ISIS project is something that is anathema to Arab nationalism. It's anathema to the regional organization, the Arab League. It's anathema to the leading states in the region, and cannot be allowed to stand. And then you have to start saying, all right, now what are the military options that you have? What are the instruments you have? What are the humanitarian instruments you have? And what are the things where you want to interact with the international community? But if you absent yourself what you end up doing is you end up becoming a spectator. You're watching a show that's being run by other people, and then we go back to interpret this by saying there is a big conspiracy against us, and you go back to the victim mentality.
Right.
Instead of changing your history and taking control, you become a subject of history and a victim of history.
Okay, Dr. Ibrahim, let me ask you the same question. What really do you think, from your perspective, will it take to stop the IS from spreading both in Iraq and regionally?
Well, obviously, it goes beyond the capabilities of Iraqis themselves to do it today. That's very clear. And let me say also that even regionally, it will not be, and I totally agree with Mr. Ambassador about the vacuum created by the non-existence of any strong Arab role in the region, and creating such a vacuum will open the way largely for international intervention again in Iraq in a larger scale than before. Talking about the ISIS, it's really a threat not only to Iraqis. As you were saying, it started some time ago, and it has gone that far because it was not confronted at the beginning properly, whether from Iraqis themselves or even regionally. And I'm sad to say that this is like a chronic historic practices in the Arab region. They always wait until it's very much late, and then they wake up and they sober when it's already late, and very costly for them to intervene in the right time. A lot of casualties the toll is getting higher every moment, not every day. And the equation of power inside Iraq is very much going to the direction of ISIS. And as I said before, they have tools at their hands, and they have numbers. And the threat is not only inside Iraq. I'm talking about the regional threat, about the threat of expansion of the ideology itself.
But you mentioned something very important, and that was who is financing?
Yeah, who is financing?
Who do you think is behind this group?
It's a question today. Probably it's easier today for them to finance because they put their hands already on some rich areas in the northern Iraq. But before that, where did they get the money? It's billions of dollars. It's not only just weapons. It's everything. It's a huge amount of logistics. They are moving convoys, very sophisticated weapons, very sophisticated communication tools, and everything. So they got the last notch of everything at their hands. Who is behind them? And by the way, most of the weapons and most of the equipment that they have at their hands are coming from American made. Right. It doesn't mean necessarily that the United States is doing that, but I'm talking about they have the richest and they have the most sophisticated tools at their hands, and it did not start yesterday. It started a couple of years ago, and it started in Iraq in a very small scale, and then it expanded to Syria and get larger in Syria with playing like sort of magnet to the youth in the region under the banner of jihad. They have gone to Syria, not only from the region, and you might be surprised if you know that a lot youth coming from United Kingdom, coming from France, coming from Holland and other European countries to support what they believe that this is a fair cause for them. And that's the real threat I see today, that the possible expansion of this poisonous ideology in the region itself. And we in Egypt even we are not safe from that. And let me tell you that the whole region is fragile enough, it's weak enough. So under such strikes or hits of that sort, we have to, for instance, in Egypt, the last educational year was a lot of problems and demonstrations at the Egyptian universities, huge confrontations between the students that belong to Muslim Brotherhood and the groups that circle around them and the police. So we already have this, readiness. Right. So for this sort of poisonous ideology to come to us and to start to invade us and to hit us more and more.
Right.
So we have to be very careful about that. Not only Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, as Mr. Ambassador said, where is the Arabs? And the threat is really imminent today. It's closer than ever. And, at particular point, it will be beyond control.
Right.
Are we going to wait until this happens?
Well, let me, in a nutshell, just ask both of you gentlemen really how you see this scenario playing out and how much of really a positive is today's retaking of the Mosul Dam, Dr. Zahra?
Well, I tend to be optimistic actually. But optimism is not enough. But what I used to think about in such situations is that the Iraqi people are those who are, at the first level and to the last level, they are responsible for bringing peace and stability to Iraq.
Okay.
And in the Arab world also, every country has to play a role,
Ambassador Mohammed, just in a nutshell.
I think we have several scenarios, but one of the most possible is that of a protracted conflict.
Right.
We're seeing, and this is a pattern, we're seeing this, that the state structures in the region are no longer capable of controlling all the events. So we're starting to see very weak states. And we're starting to seeing hybrid entities that have almost quasi-state status. So they run cities, and they actually collect taxes, and they have international relations, and they carry on for years and years. And we're starting to see this in Libya. We're starting to see it in Syria. We're seeing it now in Iraq. So I'm afraid that there is a pattern here, and unless there is a major shift in the way the big powers in the Arab world see this and react to it, and also by now there must be a change in terms of the nature of international intervention, that it has to be much more big picture. There has to be an idea behind it. It's not enough to come in to protect a religious group or an ethnic group. That smacks a little bit of old-fashioned colonial intervention. So I think we need to go beyond that.
Okay, I thank you very much, Ambassador Mohammed Salem, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for coming in. Dr.